Deep in the heart of the nebula reaches, where purple mists swirled around dying stars, merchants whispered stories that made grown warriors weep with fear. Every trader who dared venture into those cursed regions carried the same warning from port to port across 1,000 worlds. Avoid the crimson shadow that moves between the moons. The beast had a name that none dared speak above a whisper. Crimson Wing, the devourer of worlds, the ancient terror, whose very presence could turn brave admirals into trembling children. His scales gleamed like molten copper under distant suns, each one larger than a fighter craft and harder than military-grade armor. When he spread his massive wings, they blocked out entire star systems, casting darkness across planets that had known light for billions of years. For over 3,000 standard years, Crimson Wing had ruled his domain with claws of fire and breath that could melt asteroids into glowing slag. His lair sat within a massive moon that he had hollowed out with his bare talons, carving chambers so vast that entire fleets could dock within them without ever seeing the walls. The surface of his fortress moon bore the scars of countless battles, deep grooves where his claws had scraped, blackened craters where his fire had touched, and twisted metal sculptures made from the remains of ships that had dared challenge him. Every month, like clockwork, his tribute collectors would arrive at civilized worlds throughout the galaxy. These weren't ordinary pirates or raiders. They were beings from dozens of different species, all united by their absolute terror of disappointing their master. They came in ships bearing his mark, a crimson wing spread across a field of black, visible from orbit and unmistakable to any who saw it. The tribute demands were always the same: rare crystals that pulsed with inner light, metals so precious that entire planets might mine for centuries to gather enough, and sometimes stranger things, ancient artifacts, quantum processors, or simply the most beautiful works of art that a world could produce. Payment was never negotiable, and the deadline was never extended. Those who tried to resist learned quickly why resistance was futile. The battle records were kept in the Galactic Federation archives, locked away where only the highest-ranking officials could access them, but the stories leaked out anyway. Crimson Wing would arrive without warning, his massive form blotting out the sun as he descended toward the defiant world. His roar alone could shatter the windows of cities, cause tidal waves on ocean worlds, and drive lesser creatures mad with primal fear. The dragon's attacks were swift and absolute. He would circle a planet 3 times. This was his ritual, witnessed by thousands but understood by none. On the first pass, his shadow would fall across continents. On the second, his roar would echo from pole to pole. On the third pass, he would unleash his true power. Those who survived these encounters spoke of fire that burned cold and hot at the same time, flames that could distinguish between innocent and guilty, and consume only what the dragon willed. Buildings would vanish as if they had never existed, while delicate flowers in the gardens beside them remained untouched. Military installations would melt into pools of steaming metal, but civilian shelters would stand unmarked. It was this selective destruction that made him most terrifying. He wasn't a mindless beast, but an intelligence that chose exactly what to destroy and what to spare. The Galactic Federation had tried everything to stop him. They sent their greatest heroes, warriors whose names were legends across a dozen star systems. Admiral Kane the Undefeated had taken a task force of 200 ships to challenge Crimson Wing directly. Only 17 vessels returned, and Kane himself was found days later, his mind broken, muttering endless apologies to shadows that only he could see. They tried negotiation, sending their finest diplomats with offers of permanent tribute, safe passage guarantees, even complete sovereignty over entire sectors of space. The dragon would listen patiently to these offers, his great head tilted to one side like a curious cat, and then he would simply laugh. His laughter was worse than his roar, a sound like dying stars that left negotiators unable to speak for weeks afterward. They tried trickery, sending empty tribute ships filled with tracking devices and bombs. Crimson Wing would accept these false offerings with apparent pleasure. Then days later, the same devices would be found arranged in elaborate patterns on the worlds that had sent them, a message that was both artistic and terrifying. They even tried ignoring him completely, hoping he would lose interest in regions that didn't acknowledge his presence. This proved to be their worst mistake. Worlds that stopped sending tribute didn't simply face his wrath. They experienced something far worse. They would wake up one morning to find that their sun had changed color, that their gravity felt different, that the very physics of their reality had been subtly altered. These changes were never harmful, but they served as reminders that Crimson Wing could reshape reality itself if he chose to. The dragon's power seemed to grow with each passing century rather than diminish. Scientists theorized that he fed on fear itself, that every terrified thought sent in his direction only made him stronger. Others believed he was collecting energy from the tribute worlds, building toward some cosmic purpose that mortal minds couldn't comprehend. Religious leaders proclaimed him to be either a demon sent to test their faith or a god whose motives were beyond understanding. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the growing realization among the galaxy's greatest minds that Crimson Wing was not simply ancient, he was patient. Every action he took seemed to be part of some vast, incomprehensible plan. The tribute he collected never seemed to be used or consumed. Scouts who dared approach his moon fortress reported seeing vast chambers filled with crystalline formations, metal sculptures, and art galleries that stretched beyond the horizon. It was as if he was building something, preparing for something, waiting for something. The pattern of his territorial expansion followed no logic that military strategists could decipher. Sometimes he would claim entire star systems rich in resources. Other times he would ignore wealthy worlds in favor of claiming barren rocks with no apparent value. His decisions seemed random, but the randomness itself felt deliberate, as if chaos was exactly what he intended to create. And so the galaxy learned to live with this reality, that in the vast expanse of space, filled with wonders and terrors beyond imagination, there existed one creature whose power was absolute and whose will was law. They paid their tribute, they avoided his territory, and they whispered prayers to whatever gods they believed in that Crimson Wing would never turn his burning gaze in their direction. But fear has a way of breeding itself, and in the deepest corners of space, in the places where brave souls gathered to speak of impossible dreams, some began to wonder, what would happen if someone, someday, found a way to face the dragon not with weapons or tribute, but with something else entirely, something that the ancient terror had never encountered in all his long years of dominion over the frightened galaxy. The emergency beacon cut through the peaceful hum of the exploration vessel, Wanderer like a scream in the night. Communications Officer Beth Parker nearly dropped her coffee as the urgent signal flooded her console with desperate pleas for help. The transmission came from Haven Prime, a small mining colony that had been established barely 2 years ago on the edge of civilized space. Captain Ross Mitchell rushed to the communications deck, his boots echoing against the metal floors as alarm klaxons wailed throughout the ship. Haven Prime wasn't supposed to be in any danger. It was a peaceful settlement far from the usual pirate routes and political conflicts that plagued the galaxy. The colonists were simple folk, mostly families looking for a fresh start and miners seeking their fortune in the asteroid-rich system. "What's the situation, Beth?" Mitchell asked, his weathered face creased with concern as he studied the incoming data streams. At 45, he had seen enough of the galaxy to know that distress calls from peaceful colonies usually meant something terrible was about to happen. Beth's fingers flew across her console, trying to clean up the signal. The transmission was breaking apart, filled with static and interference that suggested the colonists were broadcasting from deep underground. "Sir, they're saying something about discovering their location is wrong, that they're not where they thought they were. Something about tribute and a dragon." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Mitchell felt ice form in his stomach. The truth hit him like a physical blow when the colony administrator's terrified face finally appeared on the main screen. Governor Phillips was a sturdy man who had spent decades establishing frontier settlements, but now he looked like someone staring into his own grave. "Captain Mitchell, thank God you received our signal. We made a terrible mistake when we established our colony. Our navigational charts were wrong. Haven Prime is located directly within Crimson Wing's territory." The bridge fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems. Even the newest crew members knew that name, knew the stories that made hardened spacers check their weapon lockers and pray to whatever gods they favored. Crimson Wing's tribute collectors had already visited Haven Prime, delivering their master's demands with the cold efficiency that had kept the galaxy in line for thousands of years. We have 30 standard days to deliver 2 tons of processed quantum crystals and 50 million credits worth of rare metals, Phillips continued, his voice barely holding together. Captain, we're a mining colony with basic equipment. It would take us 50 years to gather that much quantum crystal, and we don't even have the processing facilities. There are 800 people here, including 200 children. Mitchell closed his eyes, running calculations in his head that all led to the same terrible conclusion. Even if every ship in the Federation Navy worked together, they couldn't evacuate Haven Prime in time. The colony was too remote, the population too large, and the logistics too complex. By the time rescue ships arrived, Crimson Wing would have already discovered the colonists' inability to pay Sir. His first officer, Commander Sarah Reynolds, spoke quietly beside him. Regulations are clear. We're an exploration vessel, not a military ship. Our orders are to avoid contact with hostile entities and report to Fleet Command. Reynolds was a good officer, following protocol exactly as she had been trained, but Mitchell could hear the pain in her voice. They both knew that following regulations meant abandoning 800 innocent people to a fate that made experienced officers wake up screaming. For a moment, Mitchell stared at the star charts displayed on the main screen. The nebula reaches stretched across the display like a wound in space, marked with warning symbols and danger zones that represented the accumulated fear of 3,000 years. No ship entered that region without tribute or permission. No captain, in recorded history, had ever attempted to negotiate with Crimson Wing and return to tell about it. But as he stood there, feeling the weight of command and the burden of choice, Mitchell remembered something his grandfather had told him as a child. Old stories from Earth, legends about dragons that existed long before humans reached the stars. In those ancient tales, dragons weren't always monsters. Sometimes they were guardians, protectors, beings of great power who could be reasoned with if approached correctly. Beth, open a channel to Haven Prime, Mitchell ordered, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. Governor Phillips, we're coming to assist. Prepare your people for possible evacuation, but don't lose hope. There might be another way. The crew stared at their captain as if he had lost his mind. Reynolds stepped closer, lowering her voice. Sir, with respect, what can we possibly do? Even if we stripped every valuable component from the Wanderer, we couldn't meet a tenth of those tribute demands. Mitchell turned to face his crew, seeing the mixture of fear and loyalty in their eyes. These were good people, volunteers who had joined the exploration service to discover new worlds and expand humanity's reach among the stars. They trusted him, followed his orders without question, and deserved to know what he was asking of them. We're going to attempt first contact with Crimson Wing, he announced, watching as several crew members actually took a step backward. Not to fight him, not to try to trick him, but to talk, to see if there's something about humanity that might make a difference. The objections came immediately, voices overlapping as his officers tried to explain why this was impossible. No one spoke to Crimson Wing. No one negotiated with the ancient terror. No one approached his fortress moon without tribute and expected to leave alive. But Mitchell held up his hand for silence, and gradually the bridge grew quiet again. I know what the regulations say. I know what every military manual in the galaxy teaches about this creature. But think about it. When has anyone ever tried approaching him with genuine diplomatic intent? When has anyone ever offered him something other than tribute or defiance? What could we possibly offer him that he doesn't already have? Engineer. Tom Bradley asked, his practical mind struggling with the impossibility of the situation. I don't know yet, Mitchell admitted honestly. But every living being wants something, needs something. Even creatures of immense power have desires beyond simple domination. Maybe we can find out what Crimson Wing really wants. The discussion that followed was heated but brief. Several crew members requested transfers to other ships, which Mitchell granted without question. This mission would be voluntary only. In the end, 43 of his 60 crew members chose to stay, willing to risk everything on their captain's impossible gamble. As the Wanderer changed course toward the nebula reaches, Mitchell found himself in his quarters staring at a photograph of his daughter Lucy. At 7 years old, she had insisted on joining this exploration mission, wanting to see new worlds and meet alien beings. Mitchell's wife had died in a transport accident 2 years earlier, leaving him as Lucy's only family. The exploration service had special provisions for single parents, allowing them to bring children on peaceful missions to the outer territories. Lucy was everything beautiful about humanity compressed into one small, bright package. She saw wonder where others saw danger, friendship where others saw threats, and possibilities where others saw only problems. Her drawings covered the walls of his quarters, pictures of fantastic creatures, alien worlds, and spaceships soaring between the stars. In every picture, the beings she drew were smiling, welcoming, happy to meet the humans who had traveled so far to say hello, as he prepared to face the most feared creature in the galaxy. Mitchell realized that Lucy represented exactly what made humanity different from every other species they had encountered. Where others saw monsters, humans looked for the person underneath. Where others accepted fear as wisdom, humans chose curiosity over caution. Where others followed ancient patterns of submission and domination, humans dared to imagine that even the darkest hearts might hold some spark of light. 3 days later, the Wanderer approached the boundary of Crimson Wing's territory. Long-range sensors detected the massive gravitational anomaly that marked his fortress moon and smaller contacts that were likely his tribute collectors moving between the stars. Mitchell stood on his bridge, watching the displays that showed their final approach to a confrontation that would either save 800 innocent lives or add 43 more names to the galaxy's long list of those who had underestimated the ancient terror's power. "All stations report ready, sir," Reynolds announced, her voice professional despite the fear that everyone could feel. "Shall I prepare the diplomatic protocols?" Mitchell nodded, then made one final decision that would change everything. "Also prepare for guests. I want Lucy on the bridge when we make contact. If we're going to represent humanity to this creature, we should show him what makes us worth saving." And as the Wanderer crossed into the realm of nightmares, carrying the hopes of Haven Prime and the dreams of one small girl who believed that every monster was just a friend she hadn't met yet, the galaxy held its breath and waited to see if courage could triumph where force had always failed. The fortress moon hung before them like a metallic cancer against the starfield, its surface scarred and twisted into impossible shapes that hurt the eyes to look upon. The Wanderer drifted slowly toward the massive construct, its sensors overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what Crimson Wing had created in his millennia of isolation. Craters the size of continents dotted the surface, while massive spires twisted skyward like the claws of some buried giant reaching for the stars. Lucy pressed, her small nose against the bridge's main viewport, her breath fogging the reinforced glass as she stared in wonder at the approaching moon. "Daddy, it looks like someone built a castle inside a giant rock. Do you think the dragon likes decorating?" Her innocent excitement stood in sharp contrast to the tension that gripped every adult on the bridge. Mitchell felt his heart hammering against his ribs as proximity alarms began to sound. Long-range sensors detected something massive moving within the moon's interior, something that generated its own gravitational field and radiated heat signatures that made the ship's computers struggle to process the data. "All stop," he ordered quietly. "Hold position at 50,000 kilometers." The response was immediate and terrifying. The moon's surface began to crack and shift, massive sections sliding away to reveal cavernous openings that glowed with inner fire. From the largest of these apertures, something emerged that made the crew's training and preparation seem laughably inadequate. Crimson Wing unfolded himself from his lair like a nightmare-given form. His body stretched over 2 kilometers from nose to tail, covered in scales that shifted between deep red and molten gold depending on how the light caught them. Each scale was the size of a fighter craft, overlapping in patterns that spoke of eons of growth and power. His wings, when he spread them fully, cast shadows that engulfed the Wanderer completely. The dragon's head was a masterpiece of predatory evolution, ancient beyond measure yet perfectly designed for destruction. Eyes like burning stars fixed on the tiny human vessel, while nostrils the size of hangar bays released streams of superheated gas that turned nearby asteroids into glowing slag. When he opened his mouth, the crew could see rows of teeth, each one larger than their ship's escape pods. "Dear God," whispered Communications Officer Parker, her instrument screaming warnings as Crimson Wing's very presence interfered with their equipment. "The energy readings are off the scale. He's generating more power than a small star." But it was his voice that truly demonstrated his impossible nature. When Crimson Wing spoke, his words traveled not just through space but seemed to resonate directly in the minds of everyone who heard them. The sound bypassed their ears entirely, speaking to something deeper and more primal. "What presumptuous! Insects dare enter my domain without tribute." The dragon's mental roar sent several crew members to their knees, their minds struggling to process communication from a being whose thoughts moved like continental drift. "I sense no fear from your vessel. This fascinates me before I destroy you." Mitchell forced himself to stand straight despite every instinct screaming at him to flee. "Great Crimson Wing," he began, his voice steady through sheer force of will. "I am Captain Ross Mitchell of the human vessel Wanderer. We come not as conquerors or suppliants, but as beings seeking understanding. We wish to speak with you about the colony on Haven Prime." The dragon's massive head tilted to one side, a gesture that might have seemed curious if not for the casual way his movement created gravitational waves that rocked the Wanderer. "Humans." His mental voice carried notes of interest mixed with contempt. "I have heard of your species, young upstarts who spread across the galaxy like a persistent infection. You wage war with words and claim to seek peace while carrying weapons." "Carry weapons because the galaxy is dangerous," Mitchell replied honestly. "But we also carry hope, curiosity, and the belief that understanding is better than conflict. We came here because 800 innocent people will die if we cannot find another solution." Crimson Wing's laugh was like the sound of dying suns, a cosmic joke that left the crew's ears ringing and their hearts racing. "Innocent? As if such a concept has meaning in a universe built on consumption and competition. Every species claims innocence when facing consequences for their choices." The dragon began to move closer to their ship, his massive form blotting out the stars as he approached. Energy began to gather around his jaws, the familiar prelude to the fire that had destroyed countless worlds. The crew braced for death, knowing that their shields would last perhaps a microsecond against such power. But then something impossible happened. Lucy, who had been quietly drawing pictures while the adults talked, suddenly looked up from her tablet with bright, curious eyes. She had been following the conversation with the intense focus that only children can maintain, and now she seemed to reach some internal conclusion. "Daddy, can I talk to him?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge in the moment of silence before destruction. "Lucy, no," Mitchell started to say, but his daughter was already moving. With the fluid grace of childhood, she slipped away from the adult who was supposed to be watching her and ran toward the communications console. Before anyone could stop her, she had activated the external speakers. "Hello, Mr. Dragon." Lucy's voice carried across space with the clarity of digital transmission, reaching Crimson Wing just as he was preparing to unleash devastation. "My name is Lucy. I'm 7 years old. Are you lonely out here all by yourself?" The effect was instantaneous and profound. The energy gathering around Crimson Wing's jaws dissipated like morning mist. His massive head jerked backward as if he had been physically struck. For the first time in millennia, the ancient terror found himself at a complete loss for words. Lucy, unaware that she had just prevented her own death and that of everyone around. Her continued talking with the cheerful confidence of a child who had never met a stranger. "I drew a picture of you. Do you want to see it?" She held up her tablet, showing a colorful crayon drawing of a large red dragon surrounded by stars and flowers. "I made you look friendly because Daddy says that everyone is friendly deep down, even if they're scared or angry." The bridge crew stared in stunned silence as the most feared creature in the galaxy slowly, carefully moved closer to their ship. Crimson Wing's massive eye, larger than their entire observation deck, focused on the tiny figure waving at him from behind the viewport. For long moments that felt like hours, dragon and child regarded each other across the impossible gulf between their existences. "Child," Crimson Wing's mental voice was different now, softer, confused, carrying emotions that none of his previous victims had ever heard. "What are you?" "I'm Lucy," she repeated happily, pressing both hands against the glass. "I live on Daddy's spaceship. We explore new places and meet new people. I collect pretty rocks and I like to read stories about dragons." "Are you really as old as Daddy says you are? Do you like stories?" Something ancient stirred in Crimson Wing's consciousness, memories buried under millennia of rage and isolation. He remembered other small beings long ago who had looked at him with wonder instead of terror. He remembered a time when his power had been used to protect rather than punish, when beings sought his presence as a blessing rather than fleeing from it as a curse. "Stories," he repeated, the word carrying weight that made reality ripple around them. "I had forgotten stories. I had forgotten many things." Lucy bounced on her toes with excitement. "I know lots of stories. Would you like to hear one? Or maybe you could tell me a story about space dragons. I bet you know really good stories." Mitchell watched in amazement as his daughter accomplished what 3,000 years of galactic civilization had deemed impossible. She was having a normal conversation with Crimson Wing. The dragon's massive form had settled into a less threatening posture. His wings folded and his head lowered to bring his enormous eye closer to the small figure waving at him. "You remind me of my grandpa," Lucy said suddenly, studying the dragon's ancient features with the serious consideration that children gave to important decisions. "He had really old, wise eyes just like yours, and he always looked a little sad, like maybe he missed something from a long time ago. Can I call you Grandpa? I think you'd like having a granddaughter." The words hit Crimson Wing like a physical force. His massive head reared back, and for a moment the crew thought their brief reprieve was over. But when he spoke again, his mental voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with power. "Granddaughter," he whispered, the concept rolling through his consciousness like a stone dropped into still water. "No one has called me anything but terror or master for 3,000
years."
"Granddaughter." Lucy smiled with the radiant joy of a child who had just made a new friend. "So can I. Can I call you Grandpa Dragon? I promise I'll be the best granddaughter ever. I'll draw you more pictures and tell you stories, and maybe you could show me your moon castle." As the ancient terror of the galaxy struggled to process the first genuine affection he had received in millennia, Captain Mitchell realized that his daughter had just changed the course of galactic history with nothing more than childish sincerity and an open heart. The question now was whether this impossible connection could somehow save 800 innocent lives and perhaps heal wounds that had festered for 3,000 years. The vast chamber inside Crimson Wing's fortress moon had been carved from solid rock over centuries, its walls smoothed to a mirror finish that reflected the gentle glow emanating from crystalline formations embedded throughout the space. Lucy sat cross-legged on a platform that the dragon had created for her, a delicate sculpture of precious metals that formed a perfect chair sized for a 7-year-old child. Her tablet lay beside her as she worked on a new drawing, occasionally looking up to study her massive companion with the careful attention of an artist capturing her subject. 3 days had passed since the impossible encounter, and the wanderer now rested safely within one of the moon's smaller docking bays. Captain Mitchell had initially been terrified when Crimson Wing invited them inside, but Lucy's enthusiastic acceptance had left him little choice but to follow his daughter into the heart of the galaxy's greatest mystery. "Tell me about the purple flowers again, Grandpa," Lucy said, adding careful details to her latest picture. She had taken to calling the ancient dragon by this name with such natural ease that even Mitchell had begun to think of the creature differently. The ones that grew on the Singing Mountains. Crimson Wing's massive form was coiled in the center of the chamber, his great head resting on his forearms as he watched the child work. His eyes, which had struck terror into countless beings, now held a warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his ancient soul. "The Singing Mountains of Avalon 7, he replied, his mental voice soft and filled with wonder at his own memories. "I had not thought of them for over 1,000 years. The dragon's consciousness drifted back through time as he spoke, remembering worlds that no longer existed and beings whose names had been forgotten by history. "The flowers were not truly purple, little one. They shifted through every color that existed and some that only they could create. When the wind touched them, they would sing in harmonies that could heal broken hearts and mend wounded spirits. Lucy looked up from her drawing with bright, curious eyes. What happened to them? Did they go to sleep like flowers do in winter on Earth? A shadow passed across Crimson Wing's features, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. They died when the Avalon system fell to the Great War. The Korthak Empire needed the planet's core minerals for their weapons. They strip-mined the entire world, turning the singing mountains into barren craters. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Lucy immediately set down her stylus to give him her full attention. That makes me sad too, she said simply. Did you try to save them? I tried, Crimson Wing admitted, his voice carrying the weight of ancient grief. I was younger then, still believing that power could be used to protect rather than punish. I flew to Avalon 7 with all the speed I could muster, determined to drive away the destroyers. Captain Mitchell, who had been quietly observing this exchange from his position near the chamber's entrance, found himself leaning forward. This was the first time Crimson Wing had spoken of his past, the first glimpse into what had transformed a protector into the galaxy's most feared predator. But I arrived too late, the dragon continued, his mental voice barely above a whisper. The Korthak had been thorough. Not only had they destroyed the mountains, but they had poisoned the soil to prevent anything from ever growing there again. They left a message for me carved into the planet's surface with fusion cutters. The age of dragons is over. Lucy's small face scrunched up with the fierce expression she wore when encountering injustice. That was really mean. Did you tell them they were being bullies? A sound like distant thunder rumbled through the chamber, Crimson Wing's laughter but tinged with bitterness. I did more than tell them, child. I hunted down every ship that had participated in Avalon's destruction. I reduced their homeworld to ash and slag. I scattered their empire across a dozen systems and made sure their children's children would remember the price of defying me. The admission hung in the air like a physical presence, and Mitchell felt his hand instinctively move toward his sidearm. This was the Crimson Wing that legend spoke of, the destroyer of worlds, the bringer of extinction. But Lucy's reaction was not what anyone might have expected. You must have been really, really sad, she said softly, climbing down from her chair to approach the dragon's massive head. When I get really sad, sometimes I do mean things too. But Daddy says that being sad doesn't make it okay to hurt people who didn't hurt us. Crimson Wing's great eye fixed on the small figure approaching him, and for a moment his ancient heart struggled with emotions he had buried for millennia. The Korthak had hurt me, little granddaughter. They had destroyed something beautiful that could never be replaced. But did all of them do it? Lucy asked, her child's logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Did the baby Korthak help destroy the flowers? Did the old Korthak who couldn't fight anymore? Did the Korthak who loved flowers just like you did? The questions hit Crimson Wing like physical blows. In his rage and grief, he had never stopped to consider such distinctions. The Korthak Empire had been his target, and he had struck at everything that bore their name. Soldiers and civilians, guilty and innocent, all had burned equally in his fury. No, he whispered, the admission torn from the deepest parts of his soul. They did not all participate. Many were just living their lives, caring for their families, pursuing their own small dreams, but I was too blind with rage to see the difference. Lucy reached out with one small hand and gently touched the edge of Crimson Wing's nostril, her fingers barely spanning one of his scales. It's okay, Grandpa. Everyone makes mistakes when they're hurting. The important thing is that you know it was wrong now. That means you can do better next time. The dragon's massive form shuddered as emotions he had suppressed for 3,000 years came flooding back. But there cannot be a next time, child. I have done too much, hurt too many. The galaxy knows me only as a monster. That's silly, Lucy said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. People can change. I used to be scared of the dark, but now I'm not. Billy from my school used to pull girls' hair, but then he learned better and now he's nice. You can learn better too. Mitchell watched in amazement as his daughter continued to work magic that no diplomat or warrior had ever achieved. She was teaching Crimson Wing something that the dragon had forgotten in his long isolation, that redemption was possible, that change was not only achievable but expected. "But how do we show people that you're good now?" Lucy asked, settling herself comfortably against the dragon's massive head. "We need to think of something really special, something that proves you want to help instead of hurt." Crimson Wing was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind processing concepts that seemed both foreign and familiar. "There is the matter of Haven Prime," he said slowly. "Your father came here to save those colonists." "Oh yes," Lucy exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "We can start there. Instead of taking tribute from them, you could give them something, like a present. What do colonists need?" "Protection," Crimson Wing replied, the word carrying new meaning as he spoke it. "There are raiders in the outer systems, pirates who prey on isolated settlements the Galactic Federation's patrols cannot reach everywhere." Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement. "So you could be like a space police officer, but a really big, really strong one that the bad guys would be too scared to fight. And when people see you protecting the good guys instead of scaring them, they'll know you've changed." The simplicity of the solution was breathtaking. For 3 millennia, Crimson Wing had used his power to inspire fear and extract tribute. But that same power could be turned toward protection, toward being a guardian rather than a predator. The very reputation that made him a terror could become a shield for the innocent. "You would trust me to do this?" he asked, his mental voice filled with wonder. "Even knowing what I have done, what I am capable of?" Lucy smiled with the radiant confidence of a child who had never doubted that people could be better than their worst moments. "Of course I trust you, Grandpa. You're going to be the best space protector ever, and I'll help you. I can draw maps of where the bad guys are, and we can make sure all the good people know that you're on their side now." As the ancient dragon felt something he had not experienced in 3,000 years, hope. Captain Mitchell realized that his daughter had just engineered the most important diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history, and she had done it with nothing more than crayons, innocent questions, and an unshakable belief that even the darkest hearts could find their way back to the light. The transformation began with small gestures that sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. When the tribute collectors arrived at Haven Prime, expecting to find either payment or a world ready for destruction, they instead discovered Crimson Wing himself waiting for them. The ancient dragon had arrived 3 days early, not to enforce his demands but to personally deliver a message that no one could have anticipated. "Tell all who serve me that the tribute system is ended." His mental voice reached every mind within, a dozen light years. "Instead, I offer protection to those who need it. The weak shall be defended, the innocent shall be sheltered, and the predators who hunt in my domain shall face my wrath." Governor Phillips, who had prepared for death, instead found himself hosting a tea party. Lucy had insisted that proper negotiations required proper refreshments, and she had somehow convinced both her father and the galaxy's most feared creature that diplomatic discussions should take place around a small table with flower-patterned cups and homemade cookies. "You see, Mr. Phillips," Lucy explained seriously, pouring imaginary tea from a toy teapot while Crimson Wing's massive head hovered nearby. "Grandpa Dragon used to be really sad, but now he wants to help people. He's going to protect your colony from space pirates and mean aliens." Phillips, a man who had spent 40 years in colonial administration, found himself nodding along to the surreal conversation. "That's, very generous of him. But what does he want in return?" "Friendship," Crimson Wing replied, his mental voice gentle enough that it didn't make the colonists flinch. "Your little ambassador has taught me that power without purpose is merely destruction. I have spent 3,000 years being feared. Perhaps it is time to discover what it means to be loved." The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Crimson Wing, the ancient terror, had not only spared Haven Prime but had actually stationed himself in orbit around the colony as their personal guardian. Trade routes that had been abandoned for centuries suddenly reopened as merchants realized they could travel safely under the dragon's protection. But it was Lucy's ongoing influence that truly amazed everyone who witnessed it. She had established what she called Grandpa Time, daily sessions where she would visit Crimson Wing's chambers to share stories, show him her drawings, and listened to his tales of ancient worlds. During these sessions, the dragon revealed more about his true history than scholars had learned in 3 millennia of research. "I was not born to be a destroyer," he told her one afternoon as she worked on a particularly complex drawing of his moon fortress. "My kind were created as guardians placed throughout the galaxy to maintain balance and protect the development of younger species." Lucy looked up from her artwork with fascination. "Like cosmic babysitters," the comparison made Crimson Wing's mental laughter echo through the chamber. "Yes, precisely like cosmic babysitters. We were meant to watch over civilizations as they grew, intervening only when necessary to prevent catastrophic mistakes." "What happened to the other dragons?" Lucy asked, her intuitive understanding of emotions telling her this was an important question. The chamber grew quiet, and the crystalline formations embedded in the walls seemed to dim as Crimson Wing's mood darkened. "They died," he said simply. "One by one, across the centuries, my siblings fell to war, disease, accident, or simple exhaustion. Being a guardian is a lonely existence, little one. We watch over species for thousands of years, seeing generations rise and fall while we remain unchanged." "That does sound lonely," Lucy agreed, setting down her stylus to give him her full attention. "Is that why you got so angry, because you didn't have any friends?" "Partly," Crimson Wing admitted. "But there was more. The species we protected began to fear our power. They decided that guardians were too dangerous to exist. They formed alliances, created weapons specifically designed to kill dragons, and hunted us systematically." The pain in his mental voice was evident, and Lucy immediately climbed down from her chair to approach him. "That's terrible. You were trying to help them and they were mean to you." "The final betrayal came from the Atlantans," Crimson Wing continued, his massive eye fixing on memories that still burned after millennia. "They were a species I had protected for over 2,000 years. I had saved their homeworld from asteroid impacts, helped them survive 3 different plague outbreaks, and defended them from invasion by the Vorthan Confederacy." Lucy settled herself against his massive snout, offering what comfort a small child could provide to an ancient being. "But they turned on you too." "They invited me to a celebration in my honor." Crimson Wing's voice carried the bitter taste of old wounds. "They said they wanted to thank me for my centuries of service. I arrived expecting gratitude and friendship. Instead, I found weapons charged and waiting, antimatter bombs hidden in the ceremonial gifts, and the entire planet's population evacuated to underground shelters." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that even Lucy's young mind could grasp its enormity. "They tried to kill you when you came to their party." "They nearly succeeded," Crimson Wing admitted. "The explosion destroyed half the planet and left me wounded for decades. As I lay dying among the ruins of their cities, I heard their leaders celebrating. They were proud of their treachery, calling it a victory for freedom." Lucy's small face was fierce with indignation. "That's not freedom. That's just being really, really mean. No wonder you got so angry." "That was when I decided that if the galaxy wanted a monster, I would give them one," Crimson Wing said, his voice heavy with the weight of ancient choices. "I stopped protecting and started punishing. I became everything they claimed to fear." "But you're not really a monster," Lucy said with absolute certainty. "Monsters don't feel bad about hurting people. Monsters don't tell stories about pretty flowers. Monsters don't have tea parties with little girls." For a long moment, Crimson Wing simply stared at this remarkable child who had somehow seen through 3,000 years of accumulated pain and rage to find the being he had once been. "How did you know?" he asked softly. "How did you see what no one else could see?" Lucy considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Because you have the same eyes as Daddy when he thinks about Mommy. Really, sad eyes that want to love something, but are scared of getting hurt again. And because when you look at me, you smile with your whole face, not just your mouth." The observation was so insightful, so perfectly accurate, that Crimson Wing felt something fundamental shift within his ancient soul. This child had not only seen through his fearsome exterior, but had understood the wounded heart beneath. More than that, she had shown him that it was possible to trust again, to open himself to connection without guarantee of safety. "You have given me something I thought lost forever," he told her, his mental voice filled with wonder. "Hope, purpose, the possibility that I might become what I was meant to be." Lucy beamed with pride. "So you'll really be a space guardian? Again, you'll protect people instead of scaring them." "I will try," Crimson Wing promised, "but it will not be easy. The galaxy has feared me for so long that many will not believe change is possible. There will be those who test my resolve, who seek to exploit what they perceive as weakness. Then we'll show them together," Lucy declared with the absolute confidence of childhood. "I'll help you. We can make sure everyone knows that you're one of the good guys now." As Captain Mitchell watched his daughter plan a campaign to rehabilitate the galaxy's most feared creature, he realized that humanity's greatest strength might not be their technology, their courage, or their military might. Perhaps what made humans special was their ability to see potential for good in even the darkest places, and their willingness to extend trust, even when logic suggested caution. The transformation of Crimson Wing from destroyer to protector would not be complete overnight, but with a 7-year-old girl as his guide and advocate, the ancient terror was ready to begin the long journey back to the light. And the galaxy, whether it knew it or not, was about to discover what happened when the most powerful being in known space decided to use his strength not for domination, but for love. 5 years had passed since the impossible day when a 7-year-old girl called the galaxy's greatest terror Grandpa, and the changes that followed had rewritten the political map of known space. What had begun as one desperate father's attempt to save a colony had evolved into the most significant shift in galactic power dynamics in recorded history. The Crimson Wing Protection Service, as it came to be known, operated on principles that would have seemed absurd just a few years earlier. Instead of demanding tribute, the ancient dragon now offered his services to any peaceful settlement or trade route that requested protection. His mere presence in a system was enough to deter pirates, raiders, and aggressive empires that had previously terrorized the outer colonies. Lucy, now 12 years old, had become something unprecedented in galactic politics, the official human ambassador to Crimson Wing. Her quarters aboard the Fortress Moon had expanded into a proper diplomatic suite, complete with meeting rooms where she conducted negotiations with beings from across the galaxy. Her childish drawings had evolved into detailed strategic maps, and her tea parties had become formal diplomatic receptions. "The Helix Consortium is requesting protection for their mining operations in the Outer Reach," Lucy reported to her grandfather during their daily briefing. She wore a simple blue dress that she had designed herself, decorated with embroidered dragons and stars. "They're offering to share 40% of their profits in exchange for a guaranteed security presence." Crimson Wing's massive form was coiled comfortably in his audience chamber, a space that had been redesigned to accommodate both his enormous size and the increasingly frequent diplomatic visitors. 40% seems excessive," he rumbled thoughtfully. "I am not seeking to profit from protection, merely to ensure safety. Suggest they invest that money in improving conditions for their workers instead." This was typical of how the new arrangement worked. Crimson Wing's protection came with conditions that emphasized fair treatment of employees, environmental responsibility, and peaceful relations with neighboring systems. Many corporations initially balked at these requirements, but the complete elimination of piracy and raiding in protected zones proved so profitable that compliance became universal. Captain Mitchell, now Admiral Mitchell after his role in negotiating the greatest diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history, entered the chamber with a datapad full of reports. "The latest intelligence indicates that the Shadowmere Pirate Confederation is planning something big," he announced. "They've been gathering ships in the neutral zone, apparently planning a coordinated strike against multiple human colonies." Lucy's expression grew serious as she processed this information. Over the years, she had developed an impressive understanding of galactic politics and military strategy. "How many ships are we talking about, Daddy?" "Nearly 300 vessels," Mitchell replied. "It's the largest pirate fleet ever assembled. They're specifically targeting human settlements, apparently believing that our alliance with Crimson Wing has made us soft." The ancient dragon's eyes blazed with inner fire. They seek to test my resolve to discover whether the ancient terror has truly become as weak as they believe. You're not weak, Grandpa, Lucy said firmly. You're just choosy about who deserves your scariness, and pirates who attack innocent people definitely deserve it. The response to the Shadowmere threat demonstrated just how dramatically the galaxy had changed. Instead of facing the pirates alone, Crimson Wing found himself coordinating with human naval forces, Altarian defense fleets, and even former enemies, who now recognized the value of stability over chaos. The battle, when it came, lasted less than 3 hours. The sight of Crimson Wing leading a combined fleet of former enemies against a common threat sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. His tactical brilliance, honed over millennia of conflict, proved devastatingly effective when applied to protection rather than destruction. The Shadowmere Confederation was not merely defeated, but utterly annihilated, with the surviving pirates either surrendering or fleeing to distant galaxies. But it was the aftermath that truly demonstrated how much had changed. Instead of claiming the pirates' treasure for himself, Crimson Wing insisted that all captured wealth be distributed among the victims of piracy. Ships that had been stolen were returned to their original owners. Slaves were freed and given passage to safe worlds. The Dragon's Fortress Moon became a temporary refugee center for beings displaced by pirate raids. I don't understand why everyone is so surprised, Lucy told a gathering of galactic media representatives who had come to document the transformation. Grandpa Dragon was always good at protecting people. He just needed someone to remind him that protection is more fun than destruction. The interview, broadcast across thousands of worlds, captured the imagination of beings throughout the galaxy. Here was a human child, speaking with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather, about taming the most feared creature in known space. Her explanation of how she had accomplished this miracle was typically direct. I treated him like family because that's what he was missing. Everyone needs someone who loves them just for being who they are. The political implications were staggering. Systems that had paid tribute to Crimson Wing for centuries suddenly found themselves protected rather than threatened. Trade routes that had been abandoned reopened overnight. Colony ships began venturing into regions that had been considered too dangerous for settlement. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. Humans had accomplished something that 3,000 years of military might and diplomatic cunning had failed to achieve. They had turned the galaxy's greatest threat into its most effective protector, not through force or cleverness, but through simple human compassion. The humans see family where we see enemies, observed Chancellor Vexthai of the Centaurian Republic during a session of the Galactic Council. They extend trust where we offer only suspicion. Perhaps we have been approaching the challenges of galactic civilization incorrectly. The human diplomatic corps found themselves suddenly in demand across the galaxy. Species that had previously viewed humanity as an insignificant newcomer began seeking human mediation in their conflicts. The principles that Lucy had demonstrated, treating others as family, looking for the good in everyone and believing that people could change, became the foundation for a new approach to interstellar relations. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Fortress Moon, the relationship between Dragon and granddaughter continued to evolve. Lucy's quarters had become a museum of their friendship, walls covered with her artwork from age 7 to 12, shelves lined with gifts from grateful colonies, and a special display case containing her collection of crystalline flowers that Crimson Wing had learned to grow using his fire. "Do you ever miss being scary?" Lucy asked one evening as they shared their customary bedtime story session. Crimson Wing considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There was a simplicity to being feared, but being loved is far more complicated and infinitely more rewarding. When beings approach me now, they come seeking help rather than cowering in terror. They share their hopes and dreams rather than simply offering tribute. And you get to help them make their dreams come true," Lucy added. "That's way better than just taking their stuff." "Indeed," Crimson Wing agreed, "though I must admit, granddaughter, that the greatest dream I have helped fulfill is my own. I had forgotten what it meant to have purpose beyond survival, connections beyond fear. You gave me back my heart." As Lucy drifted off to sleep in her chambers, Surrounded by the gentle hum of the Fortress Moon's systems and the comforting presence of her grandfather's enormous bulk nearby, the galaxy settled into its new reality. The age of tribute and terror had ended, replaced by an era of protection and partnership. The transformation was not merely political but philosophical. Across thousands of worlds, beings began to reconsider their assumptions about power, protection, and the possibility of redemption. If the ancient terror could become a beloved guardian, if the galaxy's most feared creature could learn to love and be loved in return, then perhaps any enemy might become a friend, any conflict might find resolution, through understanding rather than force. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had always known but the galaxy had forgotten, that the greatest power was not the ability to destroy, but the capacity to heal, to forgive, and to see the potential for good in even the darkest places. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. In years to come, historians would mark this as the beginning of the Great Peace, when the galaxy learned that its greatest strength lay not in weapons or wealth, but in the simple human belief that everyone, even ancient dragons with fearsome reputations, deserved a chance to be part of a family.